Well, at 10 p.m. we can see a man walking down towards the sea, a white man in his 30s with brown hair, and in his arms is a child, 3 to 4 years of age, blonde hair, wearing pajamas, very close description to that of Madeleine McCann. Two efforts that have never been in the public domain of this one individual. Really important for us to understand who he is.
Oh, a male.
And just describe that individual to me.
It's about probably 5'8" tall. He was taller than me, but not 6 foot, and so between those two. He was wearing quite a lot of clothes, and that's one thing in hindsight, again, I think was quite...
Now, let's discuss why we were a little suspicious of him, because your suspicions were aroused, first of all, and what, first of all, made you suspicious about the fact that he was spending so much time around these scenes?
It was just very reminiscent of the Soham murders. That was my first instinct, because there was a local guy, he was hanging around the scene an awful lot. He was asking us questions about what was going on in the investigation, maybe trying to find out what we knew.
The thing is that the timeline that everyone was working on for years in this case was wrong.
We're almost certain now that this sighting is not the abductor. But very importantly, what it says is that from 9:15, we're able to allow the clock to continue to move forward. And in doing so, things that have not been quite as significant or received quite the same degree of attention are now the center of our focus.
Hello everyone and welcome. As a seasoned crime analyst and storyteller, I'm here to unravel the complex details of true crime cases and present them in a way that's both engaging and easy to understand. Today, we're diving deep into the latest developments in the Madeleine McCann case. The question has haunted the world for over a decade. What happened to Madeleine McCann? Search her name online, and you'll be overwhelmed with results. News articles, timelines, opinion pieces, amateur theories, every possible angle, every whispered rumor. But the one thing you won't find is certainty. I've spent countless hours combing through the official police files. Hundreds upon hundreds of pages, every photograph, every interview, every transcript, every tiny detail. And the deeper I went, the harder it became to accept the story most people think they know. The popular belief that a stranger slipped in and took Madeleine sounds simple enough, until you look closer. Until you examine the pieces that don't quite fit, the details that contradict the accepted version. The more you dig, the more it feels like something else happened that night in Portugal. Something that can't be neatly explained. Something that leaves a heavy, unanswered question hanging in the air. And that question might just change the way you see this entire case. In this series, we're not just retelling the headlines. We're digging deeper. We're exploring the evidence, the inconsistencies, and the overlooked details that could make you question everything you think you know about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
We, in the work that we've done, have been able to identify a British holidaymaker who was returning to their apartment through exactly the same area of the sighting that Jane Tanner saw, which is up until this point believed to have been Madeleine's abductor. And so we are almost certain that that is not actually now the case, which enables us to be able to allow the clock to continue to run. And that naturally brings us forward between the time of 9:15 through to 10 p.m. And it's that second sighting of a man walking towards the ocean with a child in his arms that we are now really keen to try and identify.
On October 15th, 2013, 6 years after Madeleine vanished, there was a sudden twist in the investigation. A detail that had shaped the case for years was suddenly dismissed. For so long, the so-called Jane Tanner sighting was treated as a key piece of evidence.
Oh, a male.
And just describe that individual to me.
It's about probably 5'8" tall. He was taller than me, but not 6 foot, and so between those two. He was wearing quite a lot of clothes, and that's one thing in hindsight, again, I think was quite...
She claimed to have seen a man carrying a child on the very night Madeleine disappeared. But after years of scrutiny, police eventually ruled it out. The man Jane Tanner described turned out to be nothing more than another tourist returning to his apartment, carrying his own daughter back from the resort's creche. And just like that, what once looked like a crucial lead collapsed. But in its place, another sighting emerged. One that investigators came to consider far more significant. The difference: this wasn't some brand new discovery. It was a statement that had been sitting in the files since May 2007, almost from the very beginning. It became known as the Smith sighting. The witnesses were an Irish family from Drogheda, 4 adults and 5 children in total, on holiday in the same town where the McCanns were staying. On the night of May 3rd, around 10 p.m., they were walking back to their apartment after dinner when they noticed something unusual. On the quiet streets, they saw a white man carrying a little blonde girl in his arms. The child appeared to be asleep, or perhaps simply resting heavily against him. The man was walking from the direction of the Ocean Club Resort, just a few hundred meters away, heading toward the beach only 150 meters further down the road. By 2013, something shifted. The Smith sighting, buried in the files for years, was suddenly pushed into the spotlight. And the reason was simple. The London Metropolitan Police had taken over the case. The Portuguese investigation had been closed back in 2008, but now Scotland Yard was running its own review, and what they found brought this sighting roaring back into focus. Detectives described the man the Smiths had reported seeing, a white male, roughly in his 30s, with brown hair. In his arms was a small blonde child, no more than 3 or 4 years old, dressed in pajamas, a description chillingly close to that of Madeleine McCann. Then came a dramatic moment on national television. During a broadcast of Crime Watch, 2 computer-generated sketch images of this man were revealed to the public for the very first time. Both sketches were based on the Smith family's statements, and though slightly different, they showed strikingly similar features: a white man, short brown hair, dark eyes, and a distinctive jawline. Scotland Yard declared this sighting highly significant. To them, this man could be the key to understanding what really happened on the night Madeleine disappeared. But that raised a troubling question. The Smith family gave their statements to Portuguese police back in May 2007, just days after Maddie went missing. If their description was so crucial, why had the world only been shown these images 6 years later? The Smith sighting changed everything. For 6 years, investigators worked on the assumption that if Madeleine had been taken, it happened around 9:15 p.m., the time Jane Tanner claimed she saw a man carrying a child. But when the Smith account was brought back into focus, that timeline no longer made sense. If their sighting was accurate, then Madeleine may have been moved closer to 10 o'clock p.m., a full 45 minutes later. And that opens up a troubling set of questions. Who was moving her, and why? Was this truly an abduction? Was she being hidden? Or was someone, in the darkest possible scenario, carrying her for another reason altogether? At first, police dismissed the Smiths' statements. To them, it was the wrong time, the wrong place. After all, if an abductor had already left with Maddie at 9:15, why would he still be wandering through the narrow streets of Praia da Luz nearly an hour later with a child in his arms? It didn't seem to add up. But here's what makes the Smith sighting so compelling. It wasn't just one person making the claim. It was an entire family, multiple adults and children, all describing the same scene. And unlike Jane Tanner, they weren't friends of the McCanns. They had no personal connection, no reason to be influenced. Some experts, including American criminal profiler Pat Brown, have even suggested this sighting could be the single most important clue in the entire case. Which brings us to another mystery: the EVIDENCE images revealed in 2013. Why did they take so long to reach the public? The answer is complicated and full of twists, because, as it turns out, the sketches weren't created by police at all. They were actually produced years earlier by private investigators working for Kate and Gerry McCann under an operation codenamed Omega. Their dossier not only included the E-fits, but also reportedly raised doubts about Jane Tanner's sighting. The McCanns received this report back in 2008, and yet the public didn't see those images until 5 years later. Then there's another detail that's difficult to ignore: the timing of when the Smiths came forward. They claim to have seen a man carrying a small girl on May 3, 2007. But it wasn't until nearly 2 weeks later, on May 16th, that Martin Smith reported it to Portuguese police. And that delay is puzzling. Think about it. You're on holiday in Praia da Luz. A little girl disappears. The story explodes across the world. You're still in town for days after the disappearance, and you've seen something that could be critical: a man carrying a child who matches Madeleine's description. So why wait almost 2 weeks to say anything? It's a question that continues to cast a shadow over this crucial piece of evidence. 6 days after Madeleine disappeared, on May the 9th, the Smith family flew back to Ireland. And almost immediately after their departure, the first major suspect in the case emerged.
Of all the Sky News broadcasts, this is also where I first met Robert Murat, who introduced himself to me on Saturday morning. I'd been asking for a translator, a local person who could help out with translating, talking to the Portuguese police, liaising, trying to get some information. And over a period of a few days, we had probably, I would say, a dozen or so conversations. He seemed like a very helpful guy. He was a helpful guy. He was also helping other members of the media. And because he was spending so much time in the area, some journalists became perhaps a little bit suspicious of why he was spending so much time here when he wasn't here in an official capacity. But we talked to him quite a lot, and when it became clear that some journalists were getting a little suspicious, I asked him what he did for a living and where he lived. He said he ran an internet business, and he lived just up the street.
His name was Robert Murat. Murat was a 33-year-old British-Portuguese man, originally from England, who happened to be staying in Praia da Luz at the time. He was living at his mother's house, less than 100 meters away from the McCanns' apartment. The morning after Madeleine vanished, Murat approached Portuguese police and offered his help as a translator. He spoke both English and Portuguese fluently, and his offer was accepted. But just 2 days later, suspicions began to surface. A British journalist working for the Sunday Mirror, Laurie Campbell, told police she found Murat's behavior unusual. In an interview on Sky News back in May 2007, Campbell explained that he was constantly hanging around the scene, asking questions about the investigation, and seemed overly interested in what reporters knew.
Now, let's discuss why we were a little suspicious of him, because your suspicions were aroused, first of all. And what, first of all, made you suspicious about the fact that he was spending so much time around these scenes?
It was just very reminiscent of the Soham murders. That was my first instinct, because there was a local guy. He was hanging around the scene an awful lot. He was asking us questions about what was going on in the investigation, maybe trying to find out what we knew. And he just seemed to be giving an air that he was authoritative, that he was working in an official capacity for the police. And I was just very suspicious about that they would take on board a man who was just a local guy. They have many people, I'm sure, who speak Portuguese and English. Why would they ask him to, go into the apartment, speak to the family, and have that sort of contact with them?
Her suspicions, though later proven completely unfounded, turned Robert Murat's life upside down. Portuguese detectives, led by Gonçalo Amaral, quickly took a closer look at him. They obtained a search warrant for his mother's property. But before executing it, Amaral arranged for Jane Tanner to take part in a covert identification exercise. She was placed inside a car, with tinted windows, positioned at the exact location where she claimed to have seen the abductor. On May 3rd, Murat, completely unaware of what was happening, was escorted by officers along that route. Tanner watched him walk past and insisted that, from the way he moved, Robert Murat was the man she had seen that night. But this identification would later prove to be completely wrong. Murat was cleared after months of intense scrutiny, with no evidence linking him to Madeleine's disappearance. In 2008, he filed one of the largest libel claims in British media history, suing 11 newspapers and a television network, and won hundreds of thousands of pounds in damages. Yet despite his name being cleared, Murat admitted years later that living a normal life had been almost impossible. Whenever new developments about Madeleine surfaced, his name was dragged back into the headlines once again.
I've tried to move on, and my family's tried to move on, but it's always something that I'm linked to. Whenever there's anything that's new, my name gets mentioned in it. So I'd like to see it.
Robert Mers, publicist, the extremely influential media man Max Clifford, now deceased, told Sky News in Britain why the massive Lyle payout to Murat was absolutely justified. Clifford was at one time the go-to PR man for celebrities, sports stars and politicians who had found themselves engulfed in scandal. He was also the agent who could fetch the biggest tabloid paydays for people with explosive stories to tell. Clifford explained that Murray suffered months of relentless attacks and false stories.
Of being attacked and all kinds of things being written about him, that the police had confiscated his computer and there were images of child pornography. Totally untrue. Those kind of things that were thrown at him over a long period of time. Don't forget that he was attacked by the British media as soon as his status, his Arguido status, was put in place. So the nightmare continues for him. This is the end, if you like, of the battle with the British media, because obviously they attacked him for months, and at least now he's got some compensation.
In fact, the scrutiny and pressure Robert Murat endured often felt even harsher than what the McCanns themselves later experienced. Now, here's something notable about the Jane Tanner sighting. The initial sketch produced with police artists showed a dark-haired man holding a child, but the man had no face. Instead, the suspect was drawn with a blank, egg-shaped outline. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, no features at all. Soon after, as police interest heightened, Murat was officially declared an Arguido, a formal suspect. Detectives searched his mother's home, combing for evidence. In the days that followed, 3 members of the Tapas 7, Fiona Payne, Russell O'Brien, and Rachel Oldfield, each went to the police. They told investigators that they now remembered seeing Robert Murat around the Ocean Club on the night of May 3rd, just after Kate McCann had raised the alarm that Madeleine was gone. Fiona Payne said that after seeing Murat's face on a Sky News bulletin reporting his Arguido status, she recognized him. She claimed she saw him around 10:40 p.m. near the door of the McCann apartment, accompanied by police already on the scene. Rachel Oldfield, wife of Matthew Oldfield, said she saw Murat around 11:30 p.m. between apartments 5B and 5D. Russell O'Brien, Jane Tanner's partner, also gave a similar account, saying he believed he saw Murat standing in front of apartment 5A that same night. But all of this clashed with Murat's own account. He strongly denied being anywhere near the McCann apartment. He insisted that he was at home all evening with his mother, only learning about Madeleine's disappearance the following morning, May 4th. In a 2007 interview on Sky News, Murat's aunt, Sally Eve, also dismissed the claims. She explained that locals who knew Robert, including many who had closed their bars and restaurants to help in the search, were all questioned by police, and none of them recalled seeing him out that night. To her, it was baffling that 3 strangers who had never met him before could suddenly claim they had. And just like that, the ripple effect became clear. Robert Murat being named an Arguido triggered another turning point in the case: the re-emergence of the Smith family sighting. Martin Smith, who owned a holiday apartment in Praia da Luz and was a regular visitor to the town, had seen and spoken with Murat on previous trips. So when Murat's face began dominating TV screens and newspapers, Smith reconsidered what his family had witnessed on the night of May 3rd. On May 16th, Smith contacted police, troubled by what he had seen. He told them the man his family observed carrying a child toward the beach that night was not Robert Murat. In secret, Portuguese police arranged for the Smith family to travel from Ireland to Portimão for questioning. On May 26th, Martin Smith, his son Peter, and his 12-year-old daughter each gave official police statements. All three described a similar scene. On that narrow road leading toward the beach, they saw a Caucasian man, brown-haired, about 170 to 180 centimeters tall. He was carrying a small, sandy-haired girl, probably aged 3 or 4, who appeared to be asleep. She wore light-colored pajamas, similar to the ones Madeleine had been wearing the night she disappeared. They weren't sure, but the girl may have been barefoot. Both Martin and Peter Smith said that after seeing photographs and television images of Madeleine, the child in the man's arms could very well have been her. According to the police record, the daughter added that she was about 60% certain it was Madeleine. After giving their statements, the Smiths returned to Ireland. It would be nearly 4 months before their account would dramatically re-enter the case.
We have played no part in the disappearance of our lovely daughter, Madeleine.
By September 2007, Portuguese authorities had made the McCanns formal suspects arguidos. After a late-night interrogation, Gerry McCann confirmed to reporters in the early hours that he too had been given arguido status. On September 8th, Sky News reported the development as a dramatic turnaround.
And Gerry McCann have both been today declared arguido with no bail conditions, and no charges have been brought against them. The investigation continues.
For 4 months, the McCanns had been regarded as victims of a heartbreaking crime. Now, detectives were treating them as potential suspects in the disappearance, and possibly even the loss, of their own daughter. The very next day, September 9th, the McCanns flew back to England. Their EasyJet flight landed at East Midlands Airport, where the media were waiting. Cameras captured the family walking down the steps from the plane. Gerry carried his 2-year-old son, Sean, fast asleep in his father's arms, his blonde head resting gently on Gerry's shoulder. Later that evening, Martin Smith was at his home in Drogheda, Ireland, watching the 10 p.m. BBC News. When he saw footage of Gerry carrying Sean off the plane, he froze. To him, it felt like watching an action replay of that night in Portugal. 11 days later, Smith picked up the phone and contacted police. Portuguese detectives were alerted, and plans were even discussed to bring the Smiths back for further statements, or possibly a reconstruction. But on October 2nd, Chief Investigator Gonçalo Amaral was abruptly removed from the case after publicly criticizing British involvement and accusing authorities of focusing only on the leads Kate and Gerry McCann wanted pursued. Amaral was dismissed, and the investigation was handed to Paulo Rebelo, an assistant national police director. Instead of recalling the Smiths to Portugal, 7 written questions were sent via Irish police. Among them was one stark query: was it really Gerry McCann? There was a long delay. Finally, in February 2008, 5 months after the East Midlands footage aired, Sergeant Liam Hogan of the Irish Police visited Martin Smith. Smith confirmed his original statement, but this time he went further. He told Hogan that he was 60 to 80% sure the man he had seen in Portugal was Gerry McCann, basing his opinion on the way Gerry carried his son as he walked off the plane. In his official report, Sergeant Hogan added that Martin Smith had rejected repeated offers from British tabloids, refusing to sell his story. He described Smith as well known in his community, a respectable man. Hogan also noted that private investigators working for the McCanns had already reached out to the Smith family, hoping to use their account to help create e-fit sketches. Now let's pause here because there's a lot to unpack. First, the delay. It took months before Martin Smith's follow-up statement was taken, strangely long given the seriousness of the case. And when he did give that statement, it carried significant weight. Remember, when Martin, his son Peter, and his daughter were first questioned, all three admitted they would not be able to recognize the man they had seen carrying the child if shown him again in person or in photos. Yet now, months later, Martin said he was 60 to 80% certain. That naturally raises questions. Could the constant media coverage of Gerry and Kate McCann, their faces broadcast everywhere, have influenced his memory? After all, Martin only contacted police 11 days after watching the BBC footage of Gerry carrying his son off that EasyJet flight. 11 days is a long time to sit with a thought before making the call. Another detail worth focusing on is Sergeant Hogan's note about the McCanns' private investigators wanting to use the Smiths for e-fit sketches. But before digging deeper into that, there's the central issue of the Smith sighting itself. Martin Smith's growing certainty that the man he saw resembled Gerry McCann doesn't quite fit the timeline. The Smiths placed their sighting at around 10 p.m. But at that exact moment, Kate McCann was running from apartment 5A, shouting that Madeleine was gone, while Gerry was supposed to be at the tapas bar with the rest of the group. 7 people, the so-called Tapas 7, all confirmed he was at the table. If Gerry was indeed there, he couldn't have been the man the Smiths saw. The Portuguese police seemed to agree with that logic. When they closed their investigation in July 2008, after 14 months with no Madeleine, no arrests, and no breakthroughs, their final 57-page report explicitly stated that Gerry McCann was at the tapas restaurant at the time of the Smith sighting. On paper, that seemed to settle it, but not everyone was convinced. Former lead investigator Gonçalo Amaral has voiced concerns, calling the sequence of events questionable. And here's the problem. The timeline rests almost entirely on the word of the McCanns and the Tapas 7. They all said the crucial events happened around 10 p.m. But what if they were mistaken? Other witnesses in the restaurant that night gave statements that didn't perfectly match. On May 4th, a kitchen hand told police she saw a man she believed was Gerry McCann leave the dinner table for about 30 minutes. A waiter, Hakeem Batista, gave a similar account. He wasn't sure who the man was, but he too said someone from the McCann party left the table for half an hour. And shortly after that, chaos erupted when it was reported that a child had disappeared. It's possible the man they saw was Russell O'Brien, who later explained he had been away from the group while tending to his daughter. But the accounts leave open the possibility it could have been someone else. This uncertainty became even clearer in a 2009 Channel 4 documentary, Madeleine Was Here, where the McCanns and their friends participated in a televised reconstruction. In it, Jane Tanner suggested that Gerry's absence after his 9:10 p.m. check on Madeleine lasted longer than just a couple of minutes. In her words, Kate had been moaning that you'd been gone a long time, watching the football.
Like that. That's my memory of it. It's like
Jez is 6'3" or something and looking up and then turning in when I finish. That's my memory of it.
Yeah, I mean, well, they just...
I mean, it's like I said, that there are inconsistencies, you know, in every major investigation.
Okay, that's fine.
Obviously, the most important thing is what you saw, Jane. It's not where Gerry and Jez were actually stood, because they didn't obstruct your view of the man you saw.
I was walking up here to do the check, and probably as I got to, it's hard to know exactly where, but probably about here, I saw the man walk across the road there carrying the child.
One of the major frustrations for Portuguese police was that an official reconstruction was never carried out. Investigators believed such an exercise could have helped clarify the many inconsistencies and contradictions about who was where and when. The closing report even noted that a reconstruction might have resolved key uncertainties about the timeline of May 3rd. And honestly, I think they were right. Eyewitness accounts will always vary. With any group of witnesses, you'll usually find a core of agreement, but also inevitable differences around the edges. That's exactly why reconstructions are so valuable. They pressure test those stories. When people are physically placed back into the setting, you can quickly see whether their versions of events truly line up, or if something simply doesn't fit. And when they don't, it raises important questions. Had a proper reconstruction been done early on, investigators might have built a much clearer, firmer picture of the timeline, and perhaps even uncovered when and how an abduction, if that was indeed what happened, could have taken place. But let's circle back to the Smiths, and more specifically, the two EVIDENCE they helped create. These images were suddenly released to the public in October 2013 on the BBC. What wasn't widely understood at first is that these sketches hadn't come directly from the police. They were actually produced years earlier by private investigators hired by the McCanns. The firm behind this effort was Oakley International. In August 2008, their team traveled to Drogheda, Ireland, to meet with the Smith family. The operation was codenamed Operation Omega. During that visit, they interviewed the family, took detailed statements, and worked with them to produce the EVIDENCE. The results were compiled into a report handed to the McCanns and their advisors in November 2008. But instead of making that report public, the McCann team chose to hold it back. According to reporting at the time, they believed the dossier was highly critical of certain aspects of the investigation and feared releasing it could distract from, or even damage, the search for Madeleine. Interestingly, the document highlighted the Smith sighting as a credible lead, while casting doubt on the reliability of Jane Tanner's account. Yet despite this, the EVIDENCE weren't given to police right away. In fact, investigators only became aware of them nearly a year later, sometime before October 2009. And even then, they weren't shown to the public until 4 years after that, October 2013. This long delay remains one of the most puzzling elements of the entire case. Why did it take so long for such important sketches to reach police? And why did Scotland Yard wait until 2013 to finally reveal them on national television? There's another layer here. Everyone involved in Operation Omega had been required to sign strict non-disclosure agreements. They were warned of legal consequences if they ever revealed the full contents of the report compiled for the McCanns. It's been said that the McCann team's lawyers, the powerful London firm Carter Ruck, reminded operatives of these obligations over the years. Known for aggressively pursuing libel cases, their influence on how information was handled in Madeleine's case was significant. Fast forward to May 2011, when Scotland Yard launched Operation Grange, their official review and later investigation into Madeleine's disappearance. And here's something striking. Despite sending their own detectives to Drogheda to meet with the Smiths and gather fresh information, Scotland Yard ultimately chose to rely on the very same EVIDENCE produced years earlier by Oakley International. In other words, the UK's largest police force trusted the Smith sketches enough to make them a cornerstone of their public appeal in 2013. Which brings us back to the central mystery. Who was the man carrying a small, motionless child through the streets of Praia da Luz that night? From my perspective, this remains one of the most critical questions in the entire case. We know there were two separate sightings, Jane Tanner's and the Smith family's. Both can't be ignored. If Madeleine was taken, then either one of these men could have been involved. That makes the Smith sighting at least a 50-50 possibility of being the real one. And yet, the McCanns' handling of this sighting has always stood out. Even though their team had the Smith EVIDENCE in their possession as far back as 2008, very little prominence was ever given to them. On the official Find Madeleine website, it's Tanner's faceless sketch that takes center stage, not the Smith EVIDENCE that Scotland Yard later described as vitally significant. Even in Kate McCann's book, Madeleine, the Smith sighting appears only as one part of a larger section called Key Sightings. 6 different men are discussed: Tanner's sighting, the Smith sighting, and 4 other suspicious figures reported around the resort. Of those 6, the Smith man is the only one without an accompanying sketch. All of this leaves us with more questions than answers. Why weren't the EVIDENCE prioritized earlier? Why the delay in sharing them with both police and the public? And ultimately, who was the man seen carrying a young girl through the streets of Praia da Luz on May 3, 2007? Specialist dogs, one trained to detect human remains, the other trained to detect traces of blood, were later brought in to search the McCanns' apartment, their rental car, and the surrounding area. What they alerted to sparked a firestorm of suspicion. Soon after, Portuguese police formally declared the McCanns arguidos, official suspects. But were the dogs truly pointing to something conclusive, or was it a case of interpretation pushed too far? In the next episode, we'll dig into Eddie and Keela's findings, the phrase, scent of death, and how this moment turned the entire case upside down. So now let me ask you, how does this strike you? Do you see the Smith EVIDENCE as the most critical clue that was left waiting in the shadows for too long? Or do you think the delay in their release shows how complicated and politically charged this case really became? If you were me, how would you decode this? By trusting the Smith sighting as the key piece of the puzzle, or by questioning whether it's just another twist in a case full of contradictions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think prosecutors will have enough to stop him before it's too late? And if you want more in-depth true crime stories like this one, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because the story might be old, but justice still hasn't arrived. Thanks for watching. Thanks.